Yeah, 11:30 to 12:15. So we'll make this pretty quick. And what I feel like could be beneficial is going through my photo handbook. So this photo handbook is what I train our photographers on when they come. So just because all three of you have been in previous sessions, right? So we've kind of covered like why we do it, our purpose, all that stuff. I don't want to go too deep into that and just kind of duplicate things. So we talked about that. We want to showcase the best we can. We want to showcase, we want our church to look as good as we can, all those things. I'm just actually going to scroll my notes because for this, I think we will just focus on the, we'll just focus on the photo handbook, and then we can kind of discuss from there if there's any other questions you have or things that you want to discuss. But photography in the church, storytelling matters. You can do that through video, you can do that through photo, you can do that through graphics. But something about photos is it's still just a standard in a lot of ways for like being able to capture when it comes to your website, your business profile on Google, things like that. Having good photography really does go a long way. Like we talked about yesterday, if you look something up and it doesn't look good, it's really hard to desire it because it doesn't look appealing. So again, we're not trying to fake anything, but we also want to capture the best we can. Most individuals, I know we talked about this yesterday, they're going to look at your online presence before they attend a service, and you want to look your best, ultimately. Again, not artificial, not fake, not untruthful, but looking the best that we can. So our goal is to showcase the true and authentic church while doing our best to make it look good. And this doesn't mean to make it look inauthentic, but to use our skills and abilities to make it look as good as we can. So I'm not going to go super deep into the settings as much. Again, we'll go through the handbook, but I do recommend shooting in manual if you can. There's a couple other ways you can do it. You can shoot in, if anything, like aperture priority or shutter priority are really good options. And that will make like your ISO go into manual mode and just balance lighting. Sony's do a really good job of that actually. So that's something I'm excited to shoot with, is just shoot in some like hybrid auto setting to see if that makes my life easier. But there's also some great resources I recommend if you haven't heard of them. Omar El Takori on YouTube is really good. He talks about church photography. Life.church, they have a lot of resources available, free resources. They have a website where they just literally put resources. They have like how to shoot in a church auditorium, how to shoot church foyer pictures, things like that. And then Brady Shearer, if you've ever heard of him, Pro Church Tools, they have a really good podcast. They have it on YouTube, but they also they make really good videos for church creatives in general, but they recently did a full YouTube podcast on church photography. So I recommend listening to those guys. If you want a list of those guys, just let me know and I can give you the list. But yeah, so we'll go into the handbook to just kind of show you how I would handle a photographer on a Sunday morning. And typically I say a Sunday morning, but with our photographers, when they ask to join the team, this is something I send them at the beginning and say, hey, I would love for you to go through this to get an understanding. And then most of our photographers learning are youth students. So we then have them shoot in the youth chapel a couple nights, and then we'll bring them up to Sundays. One thing to remember, I know photographers kind of get stressed, like new people get stressed when you put them in. Especially with photographers, there's no like real stress in shooting. Like we're shooting the same sanctuary every week. So if they do a bad job, just use last week's photos or 2 weeks ago, like find some photos at work and just use those. The only thing that I would say are vital with a new photographer, and that's why I don't typically schedule a new photographer alone, is making sure like a baptism gets captured or a special guest or some type of example that pastor does that's unique to the situation. But typically like you can put a new photographer on and say, hey, just experiment, practice, press buttons, look at your shots, and you don't have to use a single one of their pictures. I recommend trying to if they have something because it gives them that kind of confidence boost, but you don't have to use their pictures, and there's no stress to like, if they don't do a great job, it's not gonna ruin a service. Video's slightly harder, but it's still very similar where it's like, hey man, I know I'm putting you in on a Sunday morning, but if you mess up, like, you're not ruining the service. Don't feel like you have to have this weight on you that if I get the wrong shot or if I do this, that I'm going to have an issue. Like, I trained a new director last week, and he was switching. Actually, I had to call him because he was switching for an event that happened while I was here. So like, I was at breakfast and I called him. He's getting set up for the event, and he was texting me during. He's like, man, I'm having so much trouble like figuring out when I want to like crossfade and when I want to cut. He's like, some of my cuts feel really abrupt, and I'm like, dude, first off, most people are not noticing that. Like, it may feel a little jarring, but people aren't noticing that. I said also, like, it's just you're never gonna get it until you just do it a lot. I was like, there's not a rule for crossfades or cutting where it's like, hey, you fade when it's slow, you cut when it's fast. It's not a rule. You have to feel it out, things like that. I was like, you're just going to get better by doing it more regularly. And so just allowing these people training, your photographers and videographers and everything else too, allowing them opportunities to shoot or to do things with low risk environments. And for photography, I do consider photography a low-risk environment on a Sunday unless there's a special event. When it's a regular Sunday morning, it's a low-risk environment. Just have a second shooter there to make sure they capture a baptism or a special guest speaker, things like that. But otherwise, just let this person shoot and experiment. That's going to be the best way they'll learn the environment, the best way they'll learn settings, things like that. And then also, if you have the ability, critique their photos with them, because they really like I learned more when I started editing than I ever did shooting. Once you start to edit, you learn a lot about, oh, I don't like this photo because of that, or I like this photo because of this. So that's one thing that I do want to start training our photographers to edit, because I learn more, and I think they learn more editing too. But again, that's just kind of some aspects of it. So we'll go through the handbook. This is, if I can, maybe. Oh, it didn't save my, where am I on a different one? You don't have to capture this. It's a mess. It didn't save my slides. So, oh, I lied. I know what I did. I'm not doing slides for this. I couldn't get the slides to work, so I just have it here. So we'll just open this with preview. There we go. All right, so we're going to go through our photography handbook, and this is something I made for our church. However, this goes for really any church could take this and I feel like get something valuable out of it, or a church could take this idea and build it for their church, which is ultimately what I recommend. And I do have this available for download if anybody wants it. I can give you the link to that. It's on my website, but I think it's like a hidden page, so you just have to know the URL. But you can download it straight from Dropbox, and I feel like it is just a very beneficial thing to have. So this is the handbook. Again, when a photographer joins the team, it's like, hey, take a look at this before you shoot on that Sunday. If you have some questions, I'll answer them. If you don't have questions, you can go, or we can go back over it on Sunday with me, things like that. So page 1 is simply the purpose of our creative team. So the purpose of our church is to make disciples and to know Jesus, grow in Jesus, and show the love of Jesus. That's our church's purpose. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a purpose statement or a mission statement for our creative team that utilizes the church's the church's mission statement. So our creative team's mission statement is to provide a window into the church and to help fulfill the CLC purpose of making disciples, and mission to know Jesus, grow in Jesus, and show the love of Jesus, utilizing digital media. So we're trying to fulfill the purpose and the mission of our church by using social media and digital media technically. And then kind of just a tagline is never stop learning, never stop growing, and reaching others. Because we want to always continue learning. We always want to continue growing. All this stuff changes so quickly. It moves fast. So if you stop learning very quickly, you will not know anything because of just how quickly things progress. And then again, our ultimate goal is to reach people. So we never want to stop doing those things. We want to keep pushing ourselves forward. So that's page 1, why we do it. That's ultimately, first and foremost, the most important thing. Page 2, we get right into the practical. because again, this is a handbook. I want people to know like this is how we do it. Settings and composition, general. We shoot in manual mode to best capture the constant changes in the environment. I talked about it in the last session. Our stage has a lot of colors. It has a lot of brightnesses. You could shoot an auto, but the camera that we use is an older camera and it doesn't adjust well. So it's just better to shoot in manual and to teach people how to change settings. For a while, and this is actually slightly outdated, ISO stays on auto to adjust for lighting changes in the sanctuary. We did that for a while, but it wasn't metering correctly on the stage and a lot of our photos turned out blown out. So we switched that back to manual. And what I do is I lock in shutter speed. I tell them use the shutter speed use this aperture, change ISO for brightness. So that's what they're doing now. Keep shutter speed in mind for movement happening. And I think I talked about this on another page, but I typically just tell them like 1/160 or 1/200. You typically won't have any issues. You'll be pretty much set. Be aware of your focus point. So we do have autofocus on cameras, but you have to choose where your focus point is on the cameras that they use. So making sure that if you want your subject in the right, your focus point's on the right. On a lot of modern cameras, we don't have a modern camera at our church. We actually use a 5D Mark III. So it's an older camera. It's a great camera, but it's older. So it's a little bit more manual. But with new cameras, obviously as tracking, it'll follow the subject, things like that. But for our photographers, I want them to make sure they're paying attention to the focal point of where their focus should be. Composition. Every image should tell a story and the composition should reflect that. This image, for example, is telling the story of our choir director's big energy, big moment. But if you shot this from behind, you would lose 90% of that story. You would see his back. So finding an angle, finding the way to tell that story. If you put him all the way on the left side of this image and all the blank space behind him, it would feel really weird because he's looking at a wall basically. So even where you put the subject tells part of that story. He's looking towards something big, and so using composition to tell a story. Be creative and always be willing to try new things. For photographers, I push creativity a lot more than I do video because yes, we want consistency, but I find our photographers can give me like the consistent shots and then creative. So I kind of push them to do, hey, get me like the standard preacher shot, these shots, and then be creative. So I give them filters to play with. I send them videos that I want them to try this or I do that. But I want them to be creative in their composition, things like that. When you're outdoor, adjust your shutter speed to compensate, and then make sure the highlights are properly exposed. That's basically just saying like you don't want your sky to be pure white. Like you want to make sure your sky has color, which means you're adjusting your highlight brightness. Because with digital, it's easier to get color out of shadows and to bring up the brightness than to bring down the brightness on digital photos. And that's just something that I've learned in the last couple of years. Indoor, expose for your subject. So again, we have a lot of weird lighting at our church sometimes. The goal that I want is make sure your subject is properly exposed. If it's a person praying, I want to make sure that their face looks natural and not making the room super bright that's unnatural. Just make sure your subject is exposed. Sometimes that means you're playing with the shadows and there's a lot of shadows or a lot of darkness. But if your subject is exposed, that's what matters. And then be aware of the background of your shots. But on the exposure, one thing that I had to teach my photographers and I recommend teaching is don't be afraid of dark. A lot of times new photographers will like crank up the brightness to make the picture of someone praying like in the altar bright. But at that point you get into this unnatural space. And so I would rather it feel more natural to the lighting of the room than to make it really bright and feel like artificial. So a lot of times like some of our altar shots or our like praying shots of people in the crowd will be darker, but that's because the crowd is darker. So I want it to feel natural to the environment, not super bright and clean because that's not the environment. And I think that I've seen a lot of photographers do that and it feels artificial sometimes because they're making it really bright in the crowd and you can tell that it's not bright in the crowd. So just being aware of that, like you want it to feel natural to the environment. And then be aware of the background of your shots. Basically, we've all taken a really great picture and then we see someone's face in the background and we're like, oh man, like just pay attention to what's going on behind the subject. And sometimes you can Photoshop it out, sometimes you can edit it, but if you can get it in camera, you want to get it in camera. This is a quick guide that I put together where I took, and I actually had some of our photographers help me. One of the ones that kind of like one of my leads when it comes to photo, I said, hey, go through our Dropbox and pick 10 pictures that you think are like our church, like our look. So he went through and found 10, I went through and found 10. We kind of compared and contrasted, put them together, and I created this. This is our general shot list. So these are photos that I think are really well done and capture the style that I like our church to have. And if you go through our Instagram, I would hope that most of our photos still have this feel. We've shifted our edit a little bit over the last year, but I feel like ultimately we're still trying to be similar to this. And then like even that picture up in the top right of her praying, it's a darker image, but that's because the sanctuary is darker. I didn't want it to feel like this where it's pure white and stuff because it's a different environment. And then what we want authentic interactions. We want authentic worship. So we want to capture people worshiping, like up there, we had a guest speaker, Brother Bounds, very passionate praying. That's very authentic. Now, there's also an authentic that you don't want, which is like the slobber and the slot crying faces. You want to balance those authenticities. But that is a picture that shows passion without being unflattering. Community, energy, smiles, personality. Some of them can be staged, but here's the thing I say about staging pictures. One, if you can help it, you don't have to do it. But two, we say like, oh, we don't want to stage things because we don't want it to be inauthentic. However, do people stand in your foyer and talk and laugh? Yes, they do. Sometimes there's not a photographer there. So it's okay to ask them to stage a photo that is true to what your church does. Sometimes people's faces just aren't great when they're talking and laughing. So it's okay to stage it and it still remain authentic to who you are, but be a clean shot. I don't do a ton of these where they're smiling and waving at a camera, but the ones on the bottom left, that showcases our branding, which is we have signs out, they have our logo. So I want to capture stuff like that. Life, diversity, and ethnicity, age, and gender. We want to show that our church is multicultural. Our church has very young and very old. We're multi-generational. And then obviously gender, we want to show, we don't want it to be like all guys for a month of posting or all females for a month of posting. We want to try to just appeal to the broad audience to let people know that, hey, we're a church that anybody can come to. We're a church that anybody can attend, anybody can serve, things like that. One more thing on this, I talked about it yesterday, but because I have this with the look that I like, what's been really nice is at one point we had a photographer who he was editing and started editing things really warm. And I was able to say, hey man, like your photos are really warm. And he's like, I don't really think they are. And so all I did, instead of arguing and saying, no man, they're really warm, like trust me, I promise, like that doesn't look like what we want it to look like. Because if you're editing week to week, you can start shifting and not notice it. And we had like warmer lights in our room, so it helped just feed that. So what I did is I just screenshotted this, and then I screenshotted our Instagram feed and sent them to him. And I was like, hey, just look at this. And he's like, oh my goodness, like those are really warm. And I'm like, exactly, like we're just straying from that. So if you don't mind, try editing the next batch to match this closer. And he was able to very well correct himself without me being mean and saying like, hey, your edits look terrible. I was just saying, hey, those edits aren't matching with the vision that we set for the church. So that's a very valuable thing too, is like, I didn't have to be the mean guy. I could just say, hey, this is what, and it was actually the photographer who helped me pick these pictures. So like, these are the pictures we picked to be like our look. Let's try to match these. And for him, it was very easy to come and do that rather than me just saying like, hey, I don't like your edits, go fix it. All right, etiquette. This is something that I think is very valuable for photographers to remember. We are very visible sometimes, especially to guests. And so we want to get the shot and we don't want to distract. We want to capture the best we can in people. So again, slobber faces, crying, praying, we want to be aware of that. We want to be conscious of that. And I don't think that means always shooting from behind. I'm kind of like, I don't like the hands up person, like back shot, but being aware of faces is very important. Respect other photographers and video team members. For a long time, our photographers would like get in each other's way, or a photographer would get in the way of the live stream guy. Just respect your others, watch, be aware of your surroundings, especially with other operators. Quote by one of my favorite tech directors is worship first, capture second. Always, like, yes, what you're doing is worship, serving in worship, but our goal is to, like, if that keeps you from worship, that's an issue. So allow yourself to worship. It's a lot easier to do with photos because you don't have to be on at all times like you do on live stream sometimes. But even with live stream, worship first, capture second. If you are doing your job in worship, you will do a better job. If you're focused on worshiping by your ministry, you're going to do a better job because you're going to be plugged in better. You're going to be more responsive. You're going to be more aware of what's happening. You're going to be more in tune with the Spirit and with the room. Be aware of your surroundings. We don't want to cause a distraction, just like we don't want to get in the way of our video team. We don't want to cause a distraction by stepping in front of someone praying because we're trying to get a shot. We don't want to accidentally bump someone with the camera, things like that. So just be cautious of that. And then this is very intentional to our team, but the edge boxes of the stage are allowed, but please refrain from being in the altar. So this is actually our sanctuary. We have little rooms like here that are like just a small doorway that it's like, hey, go up there, shoot. Like this is kind of where they were at, shooting the crowd, where they're kind of invisible. They're not walking middle of the stage. And sometimes we allow that, but we try to maintain a nice understanding of it. Just want to make sure that this is still recording because my mic died over there. All right, so we want to make sure that we're aware of that. And then I'd say refrain from the altar. Every once in a while with special events, we'll be a little bit more creative. We'll go up and get like that cool wide shot from the altar and stuff. But a lot of times the altar shot isn't even a great shot. So it was twofold. One, it's distracting because you have to go up in front of everyone. But two, like I wasn't liking the shots because it kind of feels like under and chin and all that. So it's like, you're going to get a better shot taking 5 steps back and going 2 or 3 rows deep and shooting through people than you would go into the altar anyways. So that was kind of twofold because I got them to stop giving me a shot that I didn't like, and it maintained the ability for them to not be causing distractions by walking up into the altar. But again, that's kind of more specific to our church. Some churches have more strict guidelines when it comes to where they want video and photo team. Some have looser guidelines where they can go wherever they want. That's situational, dependent on your environment. Expectations: on time, prepared. We're a team, and we are committed to creative and spiritual growth. So, on time, that means early. Prepared, that means you don't show up before service to set up your camera. You don't show up at service time to set up your camera. You show up before service to set up your camera or gear. We're a team. We work together. We're aware of our video team. We're aware of the graphics team. We all have to work together. It's not photographers against the world. It's not photographers are the greatest team on the earth. We all are working together to make this service happen, whether it be through photo or video or anything else. We are committed to creative and spiritual growth. Again, we never stop growing. We never stop reaching. And then we never allow our skills or our job to stop us from growing spiritually. Do's and don'ts. Don't only wear dark colors. Black is preferred. I don't enforce these ones much, almost at all, just because it's just one of those things that like I've allowed some things and I need to get back to enforcing them, but right now I would rather just get volunteers that are willing and building that relationship. So I haven't enforced these too much, but these are the recommended do's and don'ts. Only wear dark colors. Black is preferred. If you have questions, ask them. We want to help you. One thing I tell our new photographers is if you're shooting and all your photos like are looking bad or wrong, don't keep shooting the whole service. Come find me or come find one of our photographer leads and talk to us so that we can fix the issue in the middle of service, not get all your photos back and they're all bad. So making sure that they understand like, hey, if you need to ask a question, ask it when you need to ask the question, don't come to me after service and say, hey, all the photos look bad and hand me the camera. Like, let's fix it so that we can have something from that service. capture the moment. Again, just paying attention to the moment and trying to capture that moment when you can find it. Don't cut at the joint. So this is kind of a photographer trick of don't cut like on a kneecap, don't cut right at the waist, don't cut like right at the elbow. It just kind of feels unnatural. So a lot of photographers recommend if you're gonna cut, like if you're not gonna do a full body image, cut maybe at the thigh or in the calf or just different parts. Cutting at a joint can feel really awkward for a photo, and it's something that you don't really, it's hard to put words to, but it just feels weird. So I recommend not doing that. If they do, a lot of times I'll crop it in a little bit to be at the thigh instead of the knee or things like that. Don't distract others from their worship. Again, that goes back to the previous page of just making sure that we're aware of our surroundings and we're not distracting others. Avoid capturing cry faces. Don't wear jeans or sneakers, and that obviously depends on Sunday, Wednesdays. Sunday shot list, not a rule, just a guide. Again, we want to give them tools, but we don't want to limit their creativity. So if they don't have any idea what they should do, I ask for this. I ask for 4 worship shots, just, oh goodness, different types of worship, 2 crowd interaction shots, people clapping, reading the Bible, taking notes, things like that. Preaching, I want a vertical, I want a horizontal, I want like a wide head to toe, and then I want a nice tight shot. And again, this is, if they have no idea what to shoot and they just want a list, they can follow this list and I'll be really happy. 5 to 10 foyer. So again, on a regular Sunday, we have a ton of sanctuary shots. We don't have a lot of foyer. So I always try to get them to push more foyer. Children sign in, check in, coffee shop, welcome team, our golf cart that picks up people and drops them off and things like that. I want as much of that as possible. So I say 5 to 10. And then some altar and congregational worship, whether it be raising hands or praying in the altar, things like that. And then our service schedule at 8:15, we have a team huddle where everyone meets. 8:20, I ask them to prep equipment, pre-service prayer for a couple minutes, and then shooting outdoor content, our sign holders, welcome team, golf cart team. 9 o'clock is our first service, so shoot service content. After service, hand off to 11 a.m. photographer. That way, from 10:30 to 11, the second photographer can shoot through foyer, stuff like that, and then shoot service. We do schedule a 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. photographer because we have a lot of kids who want to learn, and if we were to schedule them out like 1 per week, it would be huge breaks in between them getting to shoot. So we schedule like a 9 a.m. and 2 for 11 just to get the rotation. Rather, like, it's definitely not, if you have a couple photographers, just have them shoot 1 service, but it's more so for their practice rather than our content. Cheat sheet tips and tricks. I think this is the last page. I know we're getting close on time already, so I'll try to be quick. Shutter speed, it's what it does. And real quick, before I go too deep into this, if you don't understand this stuff, I highly recommend looking up a video on what's called the exposure triangle. That will explain this way better than I'm going to real quickly. But fast shutter speed for faster objects to capture in motion, I say stay above 160. I tell my photographers just stay at 1/160 or 1/200. Aperture is how much light comes in, referred to as F in the number, f2.8. Lower number aperture lets a lot of light in and also gives you like the cool blurry background look. Higher number lets less light in, you'll capture more detail in the background. So for landscape photos like outdoors, you would use a high aperture to capture a lot of clarity. But for 99% of times, I just tell everyone to just keep it as low as the lens allows. ISO is your light. It's like a digital brightness. If you need it brighter, you can turn it up, but I recommend not going over 6400 on the camera that we have, because after that on that camera, it gets really grainy and it adds noise to the image. And then if you need it darker, you just go dark. In a service though, I don't think we ever go darker than like 800, no matter how bright our lights are. And then if you're having trouble with the ISO, try auto ISO. A lot of newer cameras do really good with that. And so using auto ISO is a game changer for some. That is all for the handbook. Typically, I'll run over that with a photographer like in 5-10 minutes and just give them a really brief. But again, the goal is to send this to them to let them go through it beforehand. And when I run it through with the photographer, I hit like the cheat sheet, the schedule or the shot list, and like the etiquette and settings. So like with a photographer, if it's a Sunday morning, I'll just briefly scroll through this. But it's a great handbook to have available to send volunteers, onboarding volunteers, and just getting people involved and plugged in without kind of just sending them out on a Sunday morning and saying, have fun. So that's what I would go through when it's working with a photographer on a Sunday morning. Any questions? I know we have limited time on that. Any questions before we wrap up, or any questions on that? And then if anybody wants a handbook, I can give you all the URL for that.
So someone actually gave me the photo handbook not too long ago. It's
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really happy to see a positive response to that, because when I wanted to make it, I had to really dig to find one to build off of. And so it was really nice to see a good response to people wanting it, because if you really take that and plug it into your church, like using your church's footage and stuff, it can go such a long way. I think that's one of the most valuable tools I've made for our team so far. And my goal is actually to make one for video, one for graphic design, one for all those things, to really just build a culture of having resources available. Anything else?
Is it good to like zoom in more than it's needed, or in specific environments, such as like the preacher has his hand up like this and he's saying it's going crazy, okay? And say you just want to get from the top of his hand to like.
Yeah, so I'll say I think it all depends on the story you're trying to tell. I think having really good preacher shots is great, because I use preacher shots for graphics. I use them for like sermon title slides on YouTube, things like that. Sometimes a really tight image doesn't tell a full story though. So like with worship, like for a long time, I just kept getting like the waist to the hand picture of our worship leader, but it didn't tell the story. Sometimes it would literally just look like it was just him. You couldn't see any vocals behind him, any band behind him. So there was no understanding of what was going on. So if you can mix the two together and be aware not to get too caught on one side or the other. And that's one thing I really work with my team on, is like when they try new things, sometimes they go like so far into the new thing that they don't get me the other stuff. So like I told them, hey, experiment with this wide lens. And then the next like 2 weeks, all I got were wide shots. And I was like, no, I need a mixture of the two. So like learn to not get stuck on a new style or a new thing without losing what you need, which sometimes you need those tight shots. And you can tell a story with a tight shot. Like someone praying, sometimes it's really nice to have that tight focus pulled into them. But then sometimes someone praying, you want the really, like that first picture on the handbook was, I could have done a really tight shot of Pastor. Let me see if I can actually pull that up, because that's a great example. So this photo, I could have done a really great tight shot of him right here. And that would have been a really good image. However, I feel like the fact that it's wider made this image so much better, because you have the emotion of the whole church joining him in that moment of prayer. So yes, I would have had a really good picture if I would have just cut it right here. Like that would have been great. It would have showed the pastor's emotion at the pulpit, the passion, the desire there. However, because I went wider, you see the whole church in the response to that same emotion that pastor's giving. And that, in my opinion, that makes that image so much better, because it tells the story of that moment. Pastor's not doing that prayer alone. Pastor has the church body joining him in that. So I think utilizing it to tell a story is the way you want it. That's how you're using tight and wide and all that, is how does it help the story? Sometimes the tight really focuses in on that person praying or worshiping, things like that. And then sometimes the wide shows the big picture of what's happening. And sometimes you can use, like, especially instrumentist carousels, you can use a tight and a wide to tell the story throughout a tight picture, a wide picture, a medium, like to show the whole story of the conference in multiple photos. But it's use case. Like that would have been a great picture to go tight, but it also was a great picture to go wide. So it's independent uses.
On Instagram, and by taking the wide shot, if you want to go tight, you can just crop that in.
You could. Yeah, she's telling us to wrap up. You definitely could. You would lose a little bit of quality from cropping in, but I've cropped in multiple times. So yeah, thank you guys.